dear students. One thing we need to know is that the understanding of a literary piece depends highly on how that piece is interpreted. Since the Bible is also a literary piece, the understanding of the passages of the Bible depends on the exegesis of the Bible. We are starting off this course on Greek exegesis by looking at what exegesis is, the aim and the goal of exegesis, as well as the major principles guiding exegesis. In the next few minutes, this is what we'll be looking at. And at the end, I hope you will understand the beginning of this course on Greek exegesis. I welcome you to the class this evening. Let's go. Good evening, dear students. And so, once again, I say welcome to the class on Introduction to Greek Exegesis. As you have known, my name is Olubiyi Adewale. What we need to know is that by the end of this first session of our class, I expect that you should be able to define exegesis. You should be able to identify or list the principles of exegesis. And finally, you should be able to explain these principles. Understanding of a literary. Now, what is exegesis? According to Liddell and Scott, exegesis could mean statement or narrative or explanation and interpretation. And also exposition. This from Webster's New International Dictionary. Exposition, especially a critical explanation of a text or portion of scripture. This should tell you that when we talk about exegesis, it's not limited only to the scripture, it's not limited only to Bible, it is applicable to any work of literature, especially if it is an ancient document. Piece depends. Why do we need to do exegesis? Filson said that no one can read and understand ancient documents without pursuing or at least using the result of textual, linguistic, literary, archaeological, cultural, cultic, psychological, and other studies which help to throw light upon the writings of Scripture. Now, the reason why we need exegesis is to be able to examine what contributions are coming from this various field to help us to understand the text we are looking at. Highly on how that. Now, the aim of exegesis is actually to determine what the author intends to say. What the author intends to say. And this means that in exegesis, we are not interested in allegorical interpretations, which definitely was not in the mind of the authors most of the time, and which is the most common interpretation you find in the pulpits today. And it also means that we are not interested in modern applications. Though I must admit and agree that application makes use of exegesis. Application is the end result or is the end user of exegesis, but application is not exegesis in itself. So, exegesis does say, okay, to determine what the author wants to say, then he has to look at the words, the sentences, the passage in the context in which it was first set down, then place that document in the larger context of the situation in which it was produced and first read. Now, we will see how this will work when we really get into the meat of this course. That piece is interpreted. There are 4 principles of exegesis. The first one is to determine author's intended meaning. The second one is to know that texts are usually genre-dependent. The third is the role of context in interpretation, and the fourth is that text must be given priority at every point. Now, I want you to either write this down or take note of these four principles, because we are going to have an activity in the next few seconds. Since the Bible. Now, the first activity is this. What is the relevance of all these principles to exegesis? What is the relevance of principles 1, 2, 3, 4 to exegesis? Take note, think about this, and as we go on, you should be able to piece your answers to this question. It's also a literary. Like we have said, our first principle is to determine authorial intent. Now, you must always remember that in exegesis, your goal is to get to the author's intended meaning. And we must also be careful that there are times when the authorial intent may be more than one. And though I've drawn two examples on this slide, I'm going to just explain Revelation chapter 1, verse 1, which is written in Greek and it read Apocalypsis Jesu Christou, and could be translated in two different ways. One, revelation of Jesus Christ. Two, revelation from Jesus Christ. Now, if you say revelation of Jesus Christ, it means the revelation belongs to him. And if you say revelation from Jesus Christ, it means that it is Jesus Christ that is giving the revelation. Now, in the context of Revelation chapter 1, verse 1, you discover that the two meanings are intended, because the revelation actually belonged to Jesus Christ, and Jesus Christ gave that revelation to John. So it is from Jesus to John. And we must be careful not to close our eyes when authorial intent shows that they are more than one. The understanding. Now, texts are usually genre-dependent. What do we mean by this? Now, the literary form of a text actually helps us to determine how that text is going to be interpreted. If you take a look into the New Testament, you discover that we have about 6 various genres. You have the Gospels, you have historical narratives, which is basically the book of Acts. You have the parables, though they are part of the Gospel, but they are always singled out because of the peculiarity of their literary nature. You have prophecies also. Then you have epistles, which seems to be the larger books in the New Testament. And finally, you have the book of Revelation. Now, if you want to interpret Revelation, and you begin to interpret the book of Revelation literally, you will run into problem because it will become confusing. Because by its very nature, Revelation or Apocalypse is not expected to be given a literal interpretation. When we get inside this course, you will know and you will understand better. Of the passages of the Bible. Context is the key to interpretation. Now, many times you have heard people say that I am quoted out of context, and that is very important, because when you remove the context within which a particular sentence is made, that sentence can be subjected to multiple meanings. So, context in scripture is also important, and it helps us a lot to get to the meaning of the author. For example, there are some words that it is the context that will determine their exact meaning. When, for example, a particular word can have more than 2, 3, 4 meanings, then you begin to look into the context to see which of those meanings fits particularly into that context. And because of the importance of context, it shall be discussed into details later. Depends on the exegesis. Text must be given priority in everything. Now, you must understand that every one of us comes into the text with our biases. We approach the Bible with our biases from our world, biases from our perspective, biases from our worldview, biases from our cultural context. But a true exegesis must not just lead his own idea into the text. He must listen to the text. He must grow from the text. He must allow the text to break in into his biases. And this involves both inductive and deductive reasoning. So there has to be this continuous interaction between us and the text. And this is of the Bible diagram, which moves from text to fact to proposition to proposal to confirmation and back to the text, all in the bid to arrive at the author's intended meaning. With this, we'll come to the end of our introductory class. See you in the next class. We are starting off this course on Greek exegesis by looking at what exegesis is, the aim and the goal of exegesis, as well as the major principles guiding exegesis. In the next few minutes, this is what we'll be looking at. And at the end, I hope you will understand the beginning of this course on Greek exegesis. I welcome you to the class this evening. Let's go.